Awesome. Hello, YouTube audience. Let me actually move this over a tad. And getting ready for Zoom on a Friday night, the last Friday night in April. And I see one attendee, Vivian Carrillo, is this week's winner of a brand new Cadillac. She was the first one in the room. The Cadillac is 1971. It has no engine and it's been repossessed. So I apologize, Vivian, it's not the prize you think it is. Mark Salazar, Linda Forsyth, Jim Brubaker, Jan Kiefer, Hans and Caitlin Greasy in the house. Again, that means 56 consecutive weeks in a row. Greasy has attended. Pretty impressive. Eric and Lauren Klein are in. We are going to get to it because this is going to be a jam-packed hour. My name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels, a direct-to-consumer wine company. We specialize only in Napa and Sonoma wines, and 90-some-odd% of the time, you can't get them at a local store because they are not distributed. Tonight, we have with us a very special guest. But before we do, I want to answer a question in viewer mail that someone asked us recently. And for those of you that have been paying attention since the beginning, we actually don't have viewer mail. I'm just making this up as we go along. But someone asked about an algorithm and what does Cellar Angels use to find wines, to rate wines? And quite honestly, you are our algorithm. So we are working and we're in our 11th year and we are doing something with a chance to actually do good work. Hopefully people respond, it resonates with people, and you're our algorithm. And we hope that you tell someone, because we hope you enjoy these segments with folks like our next guest, who I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to. Jeff and Jane Greasy are in the house. I won't go into how miraculous that is that Jeff Greasy is on, but we can talk a little bit about that later. I can just tell you that 8 days ago, he was on an operating room table. That's all we'll say there. So welcome, Jeff. Good to see you. This is his 55th event. So let's get into it with Nick Goldschmidt. I had the pleasure of meeting Nick a couple of years ago and did some research on him, his philosophy, his passion, his nomad ability to travel the globe to produce wines, and his never-ending thirst for knowledge is really second to none. And tonight we have the opportunity to taste two exquisite wines. So without further ado and me blabbing, Mr. Goldschmidt, sir, it is good to see you. Thanks for joining us this Friday night. And
awesome,
cheers.
Awesome. Thank you for having me back on. I apologize, it's been a while. I must have said something bad last time or something, but thank you.
It took us a while to get through the censors and the red tape, and they're legal, but everything else is fine.
I'm opening. I'm going to go ahead and open.
Please. And I have also in my glass is the Fog's Edge. Tonight, we're going to talk with Nick. And while Nick doesn't actually need a lot of introduction, I will tell you that he's been walking a lot of the vineyards in Napa and Sonoma for 2.5 to 3 decades. He is an expert at vineyard designate wines. He likes to have the vines mature. He is very interested in all of the geeky stuff that we've been talking about for the last 5 or 6 weeks: rootstock, sometimes clonal selection, fermentation decisions. And tonight we're going to talk about decisions around harvest, decisions around press, and decisions around fermentation. So Nick, you just opened the Fog's Edge. You opened the 2016. I have the 2017. And I can tell, and hopefully everyone else has. By the way, we're going to turn cameras on at the bottom of the hour. So I hope everyone is camera ready or Zoom ready, right? You've got a nice top on and you're wearing sweats and yoga pants underneath. That's fine too. But tell me about this Chardonnay, because it's not oaky, not buttery, has a softness to it, has a minerality to it, has an acidity to it. And normally that comes from the vineyard selection. And this is a special vineyard. So walk me through a little bit about, and the crowd, a little bit about the vineyard.
Well, thanks, Martin. I think that the primary thing that I've learned over, this is, my first vintage was 82, and I would have quickly done that math. This is 2012. So like 40 vintages. The more I make wine, the less I do. Because I don't know whether it's my confidence has gotten better or I'm more in tune with the vineyards that I'm working with. There's a couple of things that immediately stand out of my memory when it comes to making Chardonnay. The first one, as I told you the other day, Martin, the first time I went to Chablis, and I was 26 years old, and I walk into the winery, very famous winery, and the guy goes to the tank and pulls a glass out and gives it to me, and I go, man, what sort of oak do you use on that Chablis? It's fantastic. And the winemaker says, get out of my winery. Because I mean, I was so stupid, I didn't know that in Chablis they don't use wood. And yet I got that character. So why did I get that character? How can I trick the palate? How can I make a wine using less inputs, but still making it as complex and fun and interesting as possible? And so that sort of led me on this big path. And a little bit later on, the second incident for me in the learning curve was, and I'm in Portugal, and I'm working for LVMH, as you know, corporate job. And it's 110 degrees out. And the reason why everyone's skinny in Portugal is because we eat barnacles, and you got 3 barnacles. It's 110, you're drinking port. It's a sunny day. And I said to the winemaker, dude, could I get a glass of white wine? They go, Nick, we don't make white wine in Portugal. And a lady walks by in the restaurant. She goes, I'll take care of you. She brings it out, fills it up like my mother, right to the top. Condensation's pouring off, and it's 110. I'm eating barnacles, and I give the one, I go, man, what happened? All the enamel on my teeth is gone. The roof of my mouth is gone. I'm like, dude, what is that? And that sensation stuck with me forever. You know, does the wine make you hungry or thirsty? And that's the sensation that I think it's all about wine. You know, this is not beer. We're not making spirits here. This is a living, breathing, evolving product. And I specifically wanted to open the 16 tonight because I wanted to see what you had to say about the 17, because the 17 is a little bit more restrained, a little bit more acidity. 16 was a little bit more flashy and in your face. And I actually used a little bit more oak in 16, and 17 I started taking the foot off the gas pedal, and as I said, making less and less additions to the wine.
Well, I want to back up and say, well, first of all, hello, Julie Fogarty. Great to have you in the house. I love the humbling lesson in Chablis, because we did a deep dive on Burgundy several weeks back, and we showed people, Montrachet and Marsal and all of those places. And then we also showed them Chablis and some of the Grand Crus there. And it's interesting. So you walk in kind of full of ego and vigor and stuff. What kind of oak do you use here? And they ask you to leave the winery.
I've only been there 5 seconds. You know, I've remained pretty good friends with them, so it's okay.
So that's a great learning experience. You're outside by yourself. The rest of the tour is still inside. And then I also like the Portugal experience, because I mean, an experience is what you get when you didn't get what you expected. So when you got hit with that overwhelming sensation after the restaurateur poured you that full glass of wine, and that stuck with you, did you say, okay, this is what I'm after? This left an imprint on me, and I want to figure out how to reproduce this?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just trying to, I don't want to use the word terroir, because I'm not a big believer in terroir, because it's so complicated. I believe in differences in soils, differences in humidity, rain, dry, whatever. Latitude is a big deal for me. Longitude is a big deal for me. But this vineyard that we're talking about culminates in one other attribute that a lot of other vineyards don't have, and that's old age. And we often talk about old vine Zinfandel and old vine Cabernet, but we never talk about old vine Chardonnay. And old vine, to me, automatically thinks of natural balance. We do very, very little work in the vineyard during the season. We do a little bit of suckering, of course, which is going on right now. But after that, we basically leave the canopy alone. We don't have to do much crop removal, because the vine is so old that it just puts out the crop that it needs to. And lo and behold.
What is suckering?
Suckering is right now, what happens is the vines are just coming out of, they're in the spring mode, they're bud push, they're up to about 1.5 inches. And depending on the type of pruning that you use, you'll get non-count, what we call non-count shoots. So when we prune to a certain bud count. And at this time of the year, there may be a little notch in the vine, or somebody hit it with a tractor or something, and that'll encourage another shoot to be pushed. And so we want to remove those shoots, because we want the vine to use too much energy to grow shoots that we don't really want on the vine anyway. And that includes the trunk. So we have to clean the trunk as well, because you often get shoots coming from the base where the graft union is.
Yep, makes sense. All right, now I'm with you. So then this vineyard is older vines.
Yes.
How old?
1974. And then
Someone have a calculator?
I know. Otherwise, I have to change the text sheets every year. I'd rather just put the year on it rather than the
There you go.
25 years old. There's 26 years.
See, now that's someone that's now experienced in the winemaking industry. Don't say 24 years, 25 years. Just put the year on there.
Exactly.
See, that's why you said early on that you're working less, so to speak. You're not working less, you're working smarter.
Okay, go on.
And it just seems less. Mark Challenor, how are you? I don't know, Peter Click, if I said hello to you, or Ken Herbers, nice to see you. So I like that. You know, you're still making a tremendous amount of wine. You're still traveling all over the globe. But this vineyard you like and you've been working it for 20 plus 30 some years. And these vines, and I love the fact that you talked about old vine Chardonnay, because I don't know if I've ever heard those three words in consecutive order before in the United States.
I think that the vineyard teaches me too. You know, it's not just me taking the grapes and making the wine. I look at those vines. I've been making, you know, I know what those vines are going to do in good years and bad years. I think it's really interesting that people always want to go, hey, who's new? Who's hot? Who's the new winemaker? Where's the new vineyard that everyone's in? No. When I go to a wine, when Kim Jong-un drops a nuclear bomb and we run to the bunker, I'm taking wines that are made by guys that are over 50. Because I know they know how to make good wines from good years and bad years and different years or whatever. I'm not going to take a bottle of wine down there when I'm going to be down there for 15 years from a guy that's only made wine for 5 years, let alone 10 years from the same vineyard. But the vines have taught me too. The vines, like when it was youthful, I would go in there and I want to do this. I want to be aggressive. I want to get the canopy straight. I want to do, you know, whatever I wanted to do. But through time, you realize, dude, you know, the vintage was actually more important than what you actually did in the vineyard. You wasted my time. I threw all that labor out there and we didn't gain anything from it. And it's true. I'd rather make good decisions now when I've got labor available than make moderate decisions in July when the heat's screaming down and we've got to do canopy correction or whatever. I'd rather make good, solid decisions in an old vineyard now because there's less work to do in an old vineyard later on. We don't get all this extra energy and the vine knows what it's going to do, you know?
I was just going to ask that I mean, the difference is, and we've talked about it before on the program, where Bordeaux, I think the average age of the vines is 36 years or 37, something like that. They don't pull out old vines. And probably to your point, because sure, economically, there's less yields, but the vine knows what it's doing. So just get out of the way.
Yeah, hang on. No, that's not true.
Oh, it does. You just said
that's not true. That's not what they do in Bordeaux. What they do in Bordeaux is they plant close. So they have smaller canopies. They put their rows closer together. They have good, not irrigation. They do where they need to. But what they do is because all of that is perfect, when a vine gets too old or a vineyard gets too old with too much disease, they don't need to pull the vineyard out. What they do is they just remove the vine. And even, so the average age of a vineyard may be 30 plus years, but they've got a lot of young vines interplanted in that vineyard. So they'll plant, you know, around 2% each year of a new vine. In California, because we're a little bit more, well, let's say I don't want to misquote, in the 80s and 90s, people just decided, you know, we're at 15% dead vines. Let's just rip out the vineyard once it hits 30 years. 30 years is the corporate lifespan of a vineyard. That's not what I do. What I do is I do the Bordeaux technique or the Burgundy technique. I remove the sick vines or the vines that are not doing very well and I'll replace them. So yeah, it's a little bit more labor intensive, but I don't want to lose the old vine character. And I think that character in this wine is inherent. I mean, it's just one, you know, on a 100-point scale, it's probably 2 more points because it's old vine, or it's, you know, we talk 20-point scale. It's something that'll move it up 1 medal in a wine competition. It goes from a silver to a gold because it's old vine.
No, it's funny because I've got, as I mentioned, both wines open. At our house, we call this the Scotland because Scotland Kiefer, who is unfortunately not with us, he likes to have 2 bottles open at a time. So I applaud him for that. But
it's because you got a left hand and a right hand. You can drink both.
You might as well take advantage of that. See, that's working smarter, right? So, so this vineyard is 40 plus years of age. You've been working it 30 some odd years, but I also think that the 20 some odd years.
Yeah, about 25 years. I was lucky I showed up when it was just hitting its prime. Or just doing the change from young vine to old vine. You know, a really good question to ask is like, Nick, when do you think vines change their character? And I think that's a really tough question for a winemaker. I mean, obviously, if I could get first crop every year, like year 3, year 4, I would take it. Because from year 4 to year 12, I have a really hard time figuring that out. Then after year 12, for some reason, the vine seems to turn, but it's different in every soil and every vineyard and every vineyard manager. It's a really tough question.
Well, and then, so when you say it turns, describe that, because obviously we know as it gets older, it's producing fewer clusters and there's less yield, but what does it mean when it's turning? Well,
it seems, maybe it's a bad term, but it's a term that I think of when a vine is gone past its adolescent stage and now it's going into an adult phase.
Right.
And in some vineyards that never happens. And I don't want to name our friends down in the Central Valley, but when you've got a high fertility soil with a lot of sandy loam and a lot of water, I don't actually think that vine naturally turns. It stays younger for a longer time. Whereas in a thinner soil, more exposure, where we make the vine struggle a little bit more and produce lower yield, I think that I could be wrong, but I think that the vine gets older sooner, if that makes sense.
Right. It's the equivalent of starting out as an infant and spending the first 8 years of your life eating processed foods. You're going to age faster. So if you don't take care of yourself, and if the vine is going to age faster, I definitely see there's something there. When it gets into adolescence or early adulthood, there's something there. I do want to talk a little bit about hang time with regards to fruit, but that also is a poll question that I want to launch to everybody.
Okay.
And does hang time increase or decrease the alcohol content in wine? A, increase, B, decrease, C, I don't know, D, more alcohol, more better. We have a very sophisticated question asker tonight.
Hey, won't let me answer.
I know. That's because you incorporated Kim Jong-un early on and it took away your answering privileges. I now remember why NSA and NATO were coming after us and said he's banned for a year. All right, we're going to give this 1, 2, 3 more seconds. So let's talk hang time. And everybody thinks hang time, I should say 6 people think hang time increases alcohol. 3 people say it decreases. 1 person says they don't know. And 1 person says alcohol is fine with me. I'm a big fan of alcohol. So talk to us about hang time and what that does to alcohol content.
I think the correct answer is I don't know.
All right.
Because it varies. So I'm drawing you a little graph here, Martin, and I'm going to show you my belief. And are we talking red? Well, it doesn't matter. We're talking red wine or white wine here. I think yes. I can figure this out. All right, here's my chart. So this is flowering and this is harvest. Okay, this is time. Yeah. Now in Bordeaux, this is 100 days. That's the standard. So this is the berries. This is starting from set flowering. You know, we're about 3 weeks away from that. Acidity starts to increase, and then at this point we get veraison. This is when the berries change color if they turn black, or if they become translucent if it's Chardonnay, and then acidity starts to go down. At this point, we get an increase in Brix, and of course Brix increases as we get closer to harvest, and obviously that's where the alcohol comes from. But flavor starts off relatively low and increases as we get closer to harvest, and tannins start high and go to this point. And tannins move from green to dusty to dry to ripe. And then where these 3 things meet in Bordeaux is 100 days.
Wow.
This never happens. If this happened, you wouldn't need winemakers, because it's not about the sugar can change. Well, I can explain. Like if you get rain, you'll get dilution, and if we get heat, you get dehydration. The other thing is that some vintages, the sugar stalls, the sugar stops for whatever reason, and we saw that in 2020 because, of course, we had cloudy days because of the smoke. But what we more importantly is flavor and tannin. So that's why I go into the vineyard, and you'll see if you go on my YouTube channel, the Goldschmidt_Vineyards YouTube, you can see me. I'll put a berry in my mouth, I spit the pulp out, I chew the skin, true for red and white. I chew the skin, then I spit the skin, and then I spit again because I'm looking at the color, especially for red and also for white, because I can see myself with white. And through that, because under the skin are these little vacuoles, these little like parcels. If you can measure, if you think of them as cells, they're little cells underneath the skin. And when you chew the skin, you're breaking those cells apart and you're learning about tannin. And as I said, they move from green to dry, which is that gravelly feeling, to dusty, which has that feeling here on the side of the tongue. And then finally you get to ripeness. And then the flavor, you'll notice, and especially as we're talking Chardonnay here, depending on what clone or field selection we're talking about, obviously we don't want to get into that tonight, you'll notice it move from warm climate to cool climate. So, you know, pineapple-y and melon starts off, and then we get down to melon, and then stone fruit, a peachy character, and then all the way down to the citrus grassy character. So you have to decide, where are you going to harvest in flavor? Where are you going to harvest in tannin? And the bricks, we're measuring anyway. We can measure soluble solids. The other thing that I look at, though,
what does bricks measure again?
You guys are American. It's very confusing. It's a metric term. 10 bricks is 100 grams per liter. 20 bricks is 200 grams per liter. It's an amazing. It's amazing.
200 grams per liter of what?
Sugar.
But
right, it's a combination of sugar. The main sugars are glucose, fructose, and, well, those are the main two sugars. Glucose is easy to ferment. That's usually what the yeast, the Saccharomyces or the Biotis, they hit the glucose quickly. The fructose is much harder to ferment. And that's why when you have high alcohol, so as sugar comes down on the chart, alcohol goes up on the chart. As the alcohol goes up, it's actually toxic for yeast. So when you have a high, this is why you shouldn't drink wines over 14.5 alcohol, because over 14.5 alcohol, you end up, except Zinfandel, because it's very hard to do, but over 14.5 alcohol, you end up with fructose. And so even though you're drinking a high alcohol wine, you're also drinking something really sweet. It's almost like drinking Coca-Cola. You don't know what you're doing, because Coke is disguised because it's got phosphoric acid. So you don't think it actually is that sweet, but it's really, really sweet because it's covering the acid. So that's kind of it's complicated.
So you're making the decision on harvest as you're walking through, and you're taking into consideration all of this with regards to biting the skin, squeezing the skin, spitting, and determining where on the tannin scale the cluster currently is, and you want to get that optimal, because you know, based upon your years of experience, that if you get that certain range, you know, there's certain other variables that you can get it into the fermentation process and kind of stop that right where you want it in that range.
Well, yeah, it's complicated. So when we receive the wine, we run an analysis on the wine. So we know once the grapes are picked, everything's homogenized. When we're out in the vineyard, it's very random. But once it's in the tank, it's homogenized. We measure sugar, total acidity, pH, and then we measure the health of the juice. And legally, in California, you can add water to lower the sugar. I don't want to do that. I don't want to add any water. I think that with water you get dilution, and so actually you're diluting the sugar, true, but you're also diluting the flavor. And so all of our wines are natural. Even though legally you can add it, I don't want to add any water. But I know that when I drink, sometimes I drink red wines that say they're 14.5 alcohol, and they're like, I get a raisin or a pruny character to it. But you know that they've added water to compensate.
So,
but other countries can add sugar. Don't get me wrong.
Well, I want to go back to the statement you made where you shouldn't drink a wine over 14.5% alcohol.
Yeah, and I know that the 18 Hillary is over 14.5.
Exactly. So let's round up. So you shouldn't drink a wine over 14.9.
Don't drink it. No, because 18 was a really was an incredible vintage, because the only vintage that I can really remember it being similar to is 1997. 97 and okay, I'll throw in 2013. 97, 13, and 18. Those three vintages. Heavy crop, and the sugar, when it ripened, it never went 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. It went 22, 24, 26. It never stopped. And it was very hard for us to get the pick. In fact, I'm very lucky to get it. I think it was 14.8, or I can't remember what's on the label.
14.7.
14.7. It was very hard to get to 14.7 because if you look at 18 on most other wineries, they're over 15 alcohol.
Well, you're right about 97, because when we first started going out to the Valley in 99 and 2000, the 97s were all the rage because it was an unbelievable vintage. 95 was a great vintage. So that's interesting stuff. I have to get to the second poll question that talks about, speaking of the 14.7, the Hillary Cabernet Sauvignon is named for the vineyard that we just talked about, the daughter, the romantic interest that got away, Sir Edmund Hillary, your idol, the first person to climb Mount Everest. And I promise you, Sir Edmund Hillary has never been invoked in a wine tasting ever.
Well, not now. Unfortunately, he passed
Pretty good
away.
group. Brett Saunders, hello, sir. How are you doing? Thanks for joining. All right, can't get a thing past this group. 100% can read the back of the label. So everybody got this one correct. The question asking this evening, I didn't sharpen my pencil. I'm going to go do everyone got it correct. So I'm going to go to the last poll question. So then if people want to, they can actually turn on their cameras and ask Nick questions personally before we get into Google Earth. So the soils in which the Fog's Edge Chardonnay are planted consist of sandy loam, volcanic, chalky, or clay.
Again, I can't answer.
Again, I know the stress is killing me. A lot of changes. I see a lot of people erasing answers and going back. 5, 4, 3, smartphones down. Oh, see, now I saw a late surge into sandy loam, which means people picked up the bottle and read the back label. Again, some question asking that I'm going to have to rethink next week. Yes, sandy loam soils. Here, before we move on to the Hillary, and if anybody wants to open their cameras, please do so. Before we move on to the Hillary, here's what I think is fascinating, and I would love you to educate us all on. We talk about phylloxera, we talked about rootstocks. Previously in the session, we talked about clones, and you mentioned one earlier. You mentioned the Dijon clone, and you have the ability with clones to kind of guide the flavor outcome to a degree, knowing that there's a ton of other attributes, but you can have, 777 does this, Pommard does that, Dijon does this. But what this Chardonnay is not a clone, and it's on a rootstock that is phylloxera and a soil that's phylloxera resistant. How on earth is that possible in this day and age? Because it's pretty fascinating. So walk us through that.
Well, for me, of course, the only this is a long philosophical question, but I'm going to answer quickly. It's in 2008 when I left the corporate world after 28 years or whatever it was. I wanted to represent growers that did not have a home for their vineyards. So I found these guys, vineyards that I've been working on for a long time, at least 15 years was the minimum. And I wanted to find a route to market for them so that they could they could stay in business. Because if you go to Napa Valley, 80% of all the vineyards are owned by wineries, 20% are owned by growers. In Sonoma County, it's the other way around. 80% of the land is owned by small independent farmers. And these guys are having a very hard time because, you know, we're not the most wealthy crowd in the world. I mean, and so buying 10 acres of land or 20 acres of land, that's a huge investment. And it's very difficult to find a route to market and live a subsistence lifestyle. And so that was my mantra, was really to find these small independent growers that wanted to support me, and I would, you know, in tough times, and I would support them in tough times. And so that's how we got started. So Randy Peters is a great example. He since went off, and the rest of the vineyard now goes to a winery called Kokomo, which is a very famous direct-to-consumer brand. But the Hillary Vineyard,
that the song from Cocktail, Tom Cruise movie. I digress. Go ahead. Not Kokomo, Indiana.
all right. And then Hillary is a vineyard sandwiched right between Nickel, and Opus. I mean, when you drive south on 29, you'll see Nickel, and then you'll see Opus. There is another.
Don't ruin my show later on. I've got a picture of that.
Oh, okay.
But no,
And
here's
then,
well, talk about phylloxera, because it's wiped out most wine around the world.
Yeah.
But this vineyard is like phylloxera resistant.
Yeah,
How does
so
that
phylloxera is a little insect, and we thought there's, you know, when you buy a peach tree or an apple tree, you'll notice that when you go to the nursery, there's a rootstock and there's a scion, SCION. This is Vitis vinifera. In the grape case, this is Vitis vinifera. It's Cabernet, Chardonnay, Merlot, whatever. This piece is called Rupestris, Blanderi, or whatever you want to call it, Riparia glora. These are, we thought this was resistant to phylloxera, but somehow, somewhere, the French had blended a little bit of Vitis vinifera into this rootstock, and so it actually wasn't resistant to phylloxera. So when it was in the ground, this insect could actually live on this rootstock. In 1989, 1990, most of the vineyards were replanted because we knew that this rootstock didn't work. And there was, and the reason why we were using this rootstock is the compatibility of these field selections was really interesting. It worked, there was no problem. When we replaced the rootstock with Riparia and we put the selections that we were using at that time on top, we started to get virus. We got leaf roll, stem pitting, corky bark, and all these other things. And so the scientists said, look, we can solve this, and that's where cloning came around. So there's one vine in the vineyard didn't show any virus, and that became clone 1. The other piece was we could take meristem tissue culture, which is how I got into grapes. You take a piece of the vine, you grow it, you take the tip, you grow that, you take the tip, you grow that, and what you're doing is you're outgrowing the virus, and you put that on the new rootstock, voila, clone 2. But why? Well, it didn't show any virus because we removed all the flavor characters. And that's why today Chardonnay tastes the same. Everything tastes like there's Dijon clone 95, 96, 75. I don't care. They all come from one plant. It's the same thing with UC Davis. And in Cabernet, it's the same thing. In Cabernet, we had the same problem. The original field selection of Cabernet, and you know, I'm talking about taking a bud, taking this bud, chipping the bud out with my knife, and then putting it on a rootstock. And this is a vine by vine thing that I did. And the original field selection was called Turkey Hill. And Turkey Hill, which I can still drive by the vineyard today. It's I don't know how old it is, but anyway, they cleaned it up. They put it into heat treatment, like I just said, meristem tissue culture. That became clone 7, and clone 7 became the clone for Napa Valley. But this vineyard I work on, it's got really good rootstock, believe it or not, 5C, 10114, 110R. These are great rootstocks. But for some reason, this is with the Hillary vineyard, they put this dirty old selection on top. Never had to be replanted. It's not on a Goldridge sandy loam that we get with the Fog's Edge, but with the Hillary, it's on a more of a sandy loam, not a Goldridge sandy loam, but it has some stones. It's free draining. It's close to the Napa Creek. And
well, I'll show everyone where these two vineyards are.
Okay.
And I think it might make sense when, of course, the Greasies have been chanting for Google Earth for the better part of 30 minutes. And oopsie, I'm going to back out of that.
What's that? Sebastopol. That's cool.
Exactly. So the region of our playground and our joy and love and passion is Napa and Sonoma, because of what Nick is talking about with regards to the infinite soil complexities, soil structures. We've learned on a couple episodes ago just how many different soil species that Napa and Sonoma have, not to mention the maritime influence. But the Russian River is a large AVA, and north to south, I mean, it's a big AVA. And you have ostensibly valley floor right along the river, but you can also get up into the foothills. And speaking of the foothills, where the vineyard is for the Chardonnay is just outside of a city called Sebastopol. And Sebastopol, this gives you an idea of how big the Russian River is. So this is the Grey Shells Vineyard. Go ahead, Nick.
Remember, the Russian River formed the Napa Valley.
That's correct, until it was diverted by a little explosion.
No. Mount St. Helena is not a volcano. It's volcanic rock, but actually it was lifted up. And then there was another earthquake and a mudslide came off Mount St. Helena, and that's what formed Knights Valley and blocked the Russian River. There's a very famous lady, her name is Dr. Deborah Elliott Fisk, and she did all the work on this. And Carneros was also below sea level too, which is where Australia should be. But when that earthquake happened, I mean, the Russian River used to flow to San Francisco.
Spoken like a true Kiwi.
You caught me. So it used to flow to San Francisco Bay, and now we call it the Russian River Valley, which is a bunch of hogwash. We need about another 30 million years to make it a valley, but it's a good marketing story. Anyway,
well, and it's interesting too, because we did show a couple pictures of California 75 million years ago and 35 million years ago, and you can see that it was still underwater. You know, the whole Colorado Basin also underwater. But this is the Grey Shells Vineyard. And then what Nick was talking about earlier with the Hillary, if we go over to Napa and its two most prominent neighbors, this is where I think location, it really comes home. And we talk about this often in wine, especially at Cellar Angels. So, you know, here's beautiful Opus, gorgeous. This is Nickel and Nickel, and this is their property, and this is the Hillary Vineyard. And last time I checked, Nickel and Nickel is $1.75 a bottle. Opus, if you can get it, is $3.50. And it's interesting to compare and contrast. Here's the Napa Creek that Nick was talking about right here, which, you know, over 10 million years has crested its banks a few thousand times and deposited all sorts of soil sediment and layers here. But this is, you can pay Nickel and Nickel that price, you can pay Opus that price. I'd rather pay the Hillary price. I think it's a marvelous wine.
And I did the due diligence on Opus. And what's really funny, I don't know if I'm probably not sharing my screen, but there's a gate between the Opus vineyard and right there, there's a gate. And I know the gate combination. So I leave, and most of my other Oakville vineyards are further down Oakville Cross. So I drove through the Opus vineyard along the river, and the vineyard guys still wave at me because they think I still work there because I did the due diligence there in 2005 or 6 or something. And Michael the Salat. He's a fantastic friend of mine. He's the winemaker at Opus, and he gives me the gate combination. Then I drive through the vineyard, I pop out on Oakville Cross and go down to my game ranch vineyard and things like that. But yeah, nice. No, it's a great. So you know,
we talked a little bit about when to pick the Chardonnay, and you mentioned it's the same process for red. You're chewing the grapes in the vineyard, and so you make the decision to pick, and it's, you know, it's a frantic process. You need to get it off because you don't want it to continue to creep up. But then you also have to make the decision to press. And as it relates to the picking, some people do it early morning, some people do it at night. When does Nick Goldschmidt pick and why?
I'm a very old winemaker. So what I like to do is I pick the grapes and then I put them in a cool room overnight.
So it doesn't matter when you pick, you just pick them.
No, because I want to know the accurate number of tons. So I want to put them in the right size tank. I want to make sure that when I process the grapes, very first thing in the morning, they're the right temperature. The guys, girls are all ready to do the process. You know, they've had a good night's sleep, hopefully, and you know, I want to be number one down the line. So
got it. And then so
yeah.
it comes. Walk us through the process. The grapes come in, and you've got to press everything.
Are we talking Chardonnay or Cabernet?
Let's go Cabernet, since that's what's now in everyone's glass.
Okay, so I bring the grapes in. I like to night harvest if I can. I like to night harvest because obviously it's cooler. If I have to go into the morning, I definitely put it in the cool room overnight. So the next step is we destem. We don't crush. So we have a process for destemming, and there's a process with rollers that you can crush. The only grape variety I crush is Zinfandel, which is another whole variety. But I just destem and basically go straight to the tank. And so the berries are whole. So I get some intracellular fermentation, and then I get the juice fermentation because there is some juicing. And traditionally, that's what we used to do. We crush everything. We get a lot of juice. We can add the yeast. I don't add any yeast. I let everything go natural. The only thing I do control though is the temperature, because the fermentation, the deepest purple color, and wines move from purple to red to brown to orange. The deepest purple color occurs on day 3, but it's not very stable, and that's why we continue with the process of fermentation, etc. And then the color reaches a stability through time. I control the temperature because I don't want the fermentation to go too quickly. So I like to have the fermentation last about 10 to 14 days. And then I leave the reds on skins for up to 5 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks. The main reason is because I don't want any crusty stuff here on the side of the bottle. Because as wines move from purple to red to brown to orange, as they get old, crusty stuff starts to occur here. Have you guys seen this before? Crusty material sort of has a... If it's not the year of your child's birth, the year you got married, the year you were born, get rid of it. Because what that crusty stuff is polymeric pigment falling out of the wine. When polymeric pigment, that's the preservative and the fruit, both leaving you. So
is polymeral figment, and I think I might have, again, I might have seen them in concert in the 80s. Is polymeral figment just also another name for sediment?
No, sediment is mainly acid derived. Polymeric pigment is, and this is a monomer, so it's a single molecule, not a dimer or a trimer. Sorry, we're talking about a dimer, a trimer. Remember, they're mirror images of each other. You must remember this, Martin. Come on.
I had one chemistry class in college, and there was a reason for that. Nick
Right,
Schramm, good to see you. Well, hang on. So I like the fact you mentioned you harvest at night, but one of the things that interested me with regards to the fermentation process is the color stability. So the color is moving into that purple pigmentation, and the way you kind of lock that in is the jacket outside the tank to keep the temperature at the, or how do you do that?
There's 3 ways I ferment. I either ferment at 28 degrees Celsius. Sorry, I got to talk metric. 28 Celsius, or I ferment it. If you want to convert, you add 15 and double. So 28 Celsius, or I ferment at 22 Celsius, depending on how full the tannins are. After the fermentation is correct, I flip the temperature. I take the 22 degree guy and I increase them to 26, and I take the 28 degree guys and decrease them to 20. And what I'm doing is I'm getting all that unstable tannin out. I'm making it sound easy. And that's why in my wines, the only time you'll see the polymeric pigment or that crusty stuff on the side of the bottle. In fact, I just had Forefathers Cabernet, which is my original wine that I made. The first vintage was 1998. We had a bottle of 1999 the other night, and it was still red. And that's because I learned this idea. Everything I've learned from other people. But I learned this idea way back when I was at CME about how to make the wines more stable for a longer period of time. So our wines go purple and they go red. They for sure go red. but they won't go brown or orange until they're super, super old. In fact, I'd have to go back to the Semi winery, like 91, 92 vintage to start seeing crusty stuff starting to occur on the side of our bottles.
Well, and then the crusty stuff, so we talked sediment and those three words you said, but how do you know and I swear to God, Nick, you said there'd be no math, and this has just all been chemistry and algebra.
Sorry.
How do you know the difference between the sediment and crystals, and what causes the crystals?
Well, the stuff that occurs on the bottom is acid. Now, we're talking red wine. Okay.
Yes.
If you get crystals, and crystals are slightly larger than polymeric pigment. So those crystals can pull color. And it's really interesting if you look at the color of the crystals. If they're white, that's purely unstable. If they're red, that is also combined with tannin that's falling out as well. So there's a difference between a white crystal and a red crystal. In a white wine, you'll often get white crystals. If you put it in your refrigerator is normally about 4 Celsius. And if you leave it in there for a week and you don't have any deposit, good for you. But if you get a deposit, you know that wine is not chemically stable. This is where, what's this new word? Natural wines come in. Look, if I keep that wine in barrel during the winter, or even in the tank during winter, the winter is cold enough to chill our tanks. We should still have the wines be stable, that the consumer doesn't need to worry about it. However, there is another problem with white wine. It's called protein instability. This does not occur in red wine, but sometimes in a white wine, you'll get it looks like cotton wool floating in the bottle, floating in the glass. Again, it comes with natural wines. Again, there's no reason for that to be in a natural wine, but often it is. And that's protein instability. It doesn't taste bad. It doesn't, but you get this swirling action. But in red wine.
Now, and this is another session for another time, but this is probably a quick question.
Oh, I'm going to get invited back?
Not with you. It's a question for another time with someone else. The protein instability cannot be done with fining. Can you
No, it's done with.
Oh, see, I told you it wasn't going to be.
No, I'm not going to do vegan. I'm a vegan winemaker. I only make vegan wines.
Okay, I like that.
But the thing to make a protein stable wine, you can add bentonite, which comes from Australia. It's made. Okay, the Australians have got one good thing other than the sheep are all ugly, but the clay that they have there is really useful. So it's called bentonite, and you add it to the wine and it pulls the protein out. It's still, because it's a natural product and it's not from animals, it still allows the wine to be vegan, but almost all white wines have bentonite added.
Interesting. And if I'm staring at a bottle unopened, can I validate or look at the bottle and determine its stability?
Yes.
How? Because it's got Goldschmidt on the label?
Correct answer. Ding, ding. Hey, put that on your group thing. No, in a white wine, what you do is you turn it upside down. Before you buy any bottle of wine, you should turn it upside down. But with a white wine, you turn it upside down and swirl it like that. And sometimes you can see little crystals, little shiny things floating through the wine. I see that a lot. And that's that can be tartrate instability, protein instability. In a red wine, you have to be a little bit more careful. What you want to do is if the bottle is lying down on the shelf, you want to pull it out and go immediately, and you'll see any issue floating down through the wine. Obviously, it's easier to see in a variety like Pinot Noir or Merlot. Right. No, not Merlot, but Grenache, something that's a little bit lighter in color. And then you want to look at the bait. You want to look where the wine was sitting on the shelf and see if there's any deposit there. But yeah.
Interesting. So everyone's going to be at their wine stores whipping bottles around, which that should go over well.
Why not?
So
then you just say, hey, you tuned into Nick Goldschmidt. He told you to do that, and then they're going to get the hell out of my store.
They don't need to do that. They're getting their wine from Cellar Angels. So we've already confirmed and validated stability. So you mentioned earlier that you've learned a lot from the 28-year-old that walked in Chablis and said, this is some great oak on here. What's your barrel program? What would you say is the lesson that's been most profound that you've learned in 4 decades about winemaking?
This wasn't on the prep sheet.
I know. I like to throw a curveball every now and then.
Man, that's a tough question.
And see, and I like learning a little bit about this, and I'll give you a second to think about it, because you're making wines in Chile, you're making wines in Argentina, in the United States, and New Zealand, and you've got this wonderful knowledge. Well, I'll frame it in an easier format. You might have actually received this question before. What would Nick Goldschmidt today tell Nick Goldschmidt of 26 years of age?
Don't worry about it, man. Just drink it and move on.
But I mean, there's some wisdom.
I've got many life philosophies. I told you the average white guy lives to 84. I'm 59. I was 59 last week. I've got 25 years left. 25 times 365 days is 9,175 days left to drink good wine. If you give me one bad bottle of wine, that's like throwing a good bottle of wine against the wall. Luckily, I had 4.5 kids move home during COVID. I'm going to hit 10,000 bottles. That was a big life lesson. Enjoy life. Secondly, don't worry about it. Oh man, I used to come home and I'd sweat. I remember sweating at night going, I think I screwed up. The TA might be, 0.2 higher than I wanted to be, or the pH was 0.5 more, or no, it doesn't matter. It's just how it's taste. And I can always fix it. They think there's 2,000 decisions to be made in a bottle of wine, at least that. And then more recently, because I'm an engineer and I also consult. I mean, I've learned a lot about fires and smoke. So locally, I've become this is my 14th year of fires. I mean, we all talk about fires, but we forget. What about botrytis? What about powdery mildew? What about floods? What about heat? I mean, every vintage is different. This is what makes wine so exciting, and embrace it, man. It's not like we go to work every day and make beer because it's the same job that I did yesterday. It's the same job I'm going to do tomorrow. This is wine. It's a living, breathing, evolving product.
I'm just curious how 4.5 kids moved home. How did a half a kid move home?
Well, the half a kid is not really my kid. It's a husband.
That's right.
But my 5th kid lives down in
an inherited
Petaluma.
Kid.
I have 5 children. I make wines with my 3 daughters. And one of those daughters lives in Petaluma, but in compensation, my oldest daughter is married to an Australian. So he was the half a kid.
Wow.
I'm giving him a half score. Anyway. I hope he's not watching. He works for Apple. He's next door.
He works in kind of, they're going some places, I think, Apple. They're going to amount to something. I like what they're doing. Is there a difference in maceration between white and red?
Well, we don't macerate whites, although I am starting to macerate Semillon. And so I started, I alluded to this fact earlier, Martin. I went to this vineyard in Itata, and I visited this crazy guy I'd never heard of before, and he's got 150-year-old vines, and the vines are all lying on the ground, and he lifts each cluster up off the ground, and it's a muscatel. I mean, who drinks muscatel? There's a 150-year-old muscatel wine, and the wine is amazing, and so I took that idea, and me, because I consult, so I get a lot of wineries to try my dumb ideas before I do it myself. So in Canada, I got these guys to crush the Semillon, and we left it on.
No truer words have ever been spoken by a consultant.
So I convinced the winemaker in Canada we made the wine in the vineyard. We built like a coffin. We dug a hole, we concreted the sides, we threw the grapes in and covered it up for 2 years. 2 years. At the end of 2 years, we went in there. The wine was this color. It was more stable, no orange character, no extraction, it was amazing. The wine had naturally evolved into this amazing product in a coffin.
Well, see, and that, by the way, is the first story that has had a positive ending, that began with, we built it in a coffin. So usually those don't end well, or they usually end with the police involvement. A question has come up: define maceration. What is maceration?
Skin contact.
Skin contact. And you do it why? Color impartial? To mean to impart more color? Or?
If I made a red wine without skin contact, it would be a rosé.
Very good.
The other thing you can do, the other way to make a red wine without skin contact is using Thermo Vinification, which a lot of other countries, when you buy cheap wine like under $7, a lot of those wines are thermo vinified. So what they do is they crush the grapes, they put it through a vacuum, they heat the grapes, they put it through a vacuum, they extract all the color, press the grapes, and then they ferment it like a white wine, and it looks red. That's the other way to do it. I don't do any of that stuff. I didn't even have the money to buy a thermo vac.
So if you're just joining us, that concludes tonight's discussion on necrophilia, coffin building, maceration, and we've traveled the continents. But I do love the fact that we covered all the bases. We figured out how and why and when you pick, figured out the fermentation process, and then obviously color stabilization. And literally, as I said in the chat, the fastest, most impressive graph I've ever seen drawn in my life. So that was pretty good. And by the way, could everybody else grab their rootstock that they have off camera? No. Okay. No one can grab their own rootstock. Yes, sir.
There's a lot of interesting things. If you go on my YouTube channel, you can see this. But the most important compound that we were talking about, stability, was a thing called if you guys remember back to your Malvin 3 glucosides and your flavanols, you know, when you went to school. So the most important flavanol is this. It's called an Anthocyanin. Remember these benzene rings? You're drinking those right now. And this thing is called an Anthocyanin. Okay. This product is, okay, that's how you spell it. That's how you impress your kids when you go home tonight. This thing is purple.
I impressed my kids that I came home tonight.
I'm not even going to go there.
4.5 of them.
So this compound is purple. If you provide heat, light, air, and time, it joins on another one. This is red. This is a tannin. This is a monomer. This is a dimer. Okay. If you add more heat, light, air, and time, that compound gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Crusty stuff. That's how it occurs.
Interesting. So it all comes back to chemistry.
Yeah. I mean, everything we do in life is chemistry.
No, that's not true. There's also a sprinkle of romance, a dash of art, and that is combined brings it all to poetry and passion and love, and you actually have all of it in spades.
Touche. So I forgot the art bit.
The artwork. Well, this has been a wonderful deep dive into chemistry and all things as far as learning when to pick. Nick Goldschmidt, can't do this without you. Thank you for going on this journey with us and basically gracing us with this little trip down the decisions you make on picking, harvest, fermentation, all of it. And also the anecdotal stories about why I think are very important, but I love the color stability aspect. And congratulations on the Fog's Edge and the Hillary, because they're both rock stars, absolute rock stars.
Yeah, and thanks so much. I put my email address in the bottom because we didn't have time to talk about where you can come and visit and all that sort of carry on. So yeah, make use of that email address. And
please. And also, as it relates to the Hillary, I know that in, I believe, 2020, that vineyard was pulled out. Yes.
Yeah. So what you didn't show on the Napa Creek, that the picture you showed, right across the creek, I have that other vineyard, and I've been making wine from there for 15 years. And starting in 2021, it would have been it will be in 2021, I'm going to make Hillary from the vineyard next door. Got it.
And you also mentioned the Game Ranch and Cellar Angels, folks. There is still some Game Ranch on the website. So that's a pretty special vineyard as well.
It's next to Screaming Eagle and Scarecrow. It's an amazing vineyard.
Yeah, it's pretty good stuff, which is why I love talking to someone who has been walking the vines for 30 plus years and know exactly what he's talking about. Where is your tasting?
Is he on next week?
Where is your tasting room?
Dry Creek. It's called the Pour House, P-O-U-R, Pour House. And I'm sitting right here in Healdsburg right now. So it would take me about 7 minutes to get there. And it's a great little place to come visit. There's about 10 wineries there. Fred Peterson, he's an old buddy of mine, was an old vineyard guy, became a winemaker. Amphora, Kokomo that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, you can just park your car and you can just walk around, and it's just like being in town in Healdsburg, but half the price, of course.
I like it. All right, you stay healthy. Everyone, all you angels out there, thank you so much for all the support. Can't do this without you. Be good, be kind to one another, drink great wine. As Nick said, there's not that many days left. Don't waste it on bad wine.
Or you're going to end up in my coffin.
Yeah,
Cheers,
be
man.
good.
Cheers,
Take